The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
There have been a bunch of stories floating around of Russian use of social media and internet company technology. This includes Facebook and Twitter and Google as part of their influence campaign around the 2016 election. And there's this common thread where anytime these huge internet companies are asked about, hey, it looks as though the Russians did this with Facebook or this with Twitter to try to influence the election results. You see very little said by those companies, and there have been some really specific reports, like, for example, a recent one in BuzzFeed called "Twitter was warned repeatedly about this fake account run by a Russian troll farm and refused to take it down." And people have been emailing me suggesting that the fact that Facebook or Twitter or Google don't really say much about alleged Russian use of their platform is indicative that those platforms were complicit in Russian interference, presumably to help Donald Trump. I don't think that that's the truth at all. The reason that these companies like Facebook and Twitter and Google don't really want to comment, don't really want to get involved in what Russia may or may not have done with the platforms, technology platforms and ad targeting that they allow, is because those companies don't want it exposed how advanced their technology is, because it would create public uproar. We have many reasons to speculate about how much Google knows about us, about how much Facebook knows about us, and about how they can really influence public opinion on whatever issue they want merely through the use of the algorithms that they've developed. Those are the real secrets that companies like Facebook and others want to protect, because more than likely, if the public was made aware of the power that these companies have, how much they know, and how specifically they can target and surgically influence public opinion, people would probably lose their minds and start calling for the corporate death penalty or worse against some of these companies. And it reminds me of YouTube adpocalypse. The YouTube demonetization crisis started at the beginning of April of 2017. And right away, you had right-wing YouTubers saying this is a political attack by Google against right-wingers. And you also had many left-wingers saying this is a political attack by Google against alternative left-wing ideas. The reality is it wasn't either. It was Google, and through their platform of YouTube, trying to secure their money stream to the best extent they can in order to avoid losing major advertisers. Now, this isn't an excuse. We should be scared of the power that these companies have, but don't misinterpret Facebook's lack of interest in commenting on how Russia might have influenced the election using Facebook ads. Don't see that and interpret it as, oh, Facebook is in the tank for Russia. They might be, they might not be. Don't interpret it as being left or right. They are in the tank, kind of similarly to Donald Trump, for income, market share, and power. And I think it's really important that we all remember that. Send me your thoughts. I'm on Twitter at @dpakman. The show is on Twitter at David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Today's new member of the day is Daniel Larson. Thank you so much, Daniel, for being a David Pakman Show member. We're supported by members like Daniel. I encourage you to sign up. You too could one day be member of the day. davidpakman.com/membership is the place to sign up. Coupon code available if you want it. I voted 17. You can also make a pledge of as little as $1 a month at patreon.com/David Pakman Show. Benefits available there as well, so check that out. Okay, let's go to the phones, why don't we? Let's go to our phone number, which is 617-830-4750. We'll take our first caller from the 717 area code. Caller, tell us your name, where you're calling from, and what's on your mind.
Hey, my name is Logan. I've actually called in before. It was a really nice experience. I'm actually calling at my campus right now.
All right. What's
Uh,
on your mind today,
at,
Logan?
so this is kind of an interesting sci-fi-esque sort of question. So what if the what if we had sort of like a one world order? Well, okay, no. Let's backtrack a little bit. What if like the president of the United States was not a human being, but instead sort of like a HAL 9000-esque robot
Yeah.
that would scientifically take the polling data from the United States and custom tailor. So like for example, like gay marriage is popular amongst the populace of the United States. So the robot would favor gay marriage over would
I think I got you,
favor
Logan. Yeah. So listen,
more.
I mean, I think politics is inherently a human thing. So I don't know that I want a HAL 9000 making those decisions. If we did have a computer running the country, I can assure you the computer would know that there is no president of the U.S. Virgin Islands. That's for damn sure. So we can be sure Trump's no computer. Logan, I appreciate it. A very interesting question, and one that is fortunately not a particularly pressing one right now. Not an issue that we are currently contending with. Let's go to our next caller from the 503 area code. Caller from 503, tell us who you are and what's on your mind today.
Oh, hey, my name is Trevor. I'm calling from Portland, and I wanted to ask, what's the best way to voter turnout on a local level? Like, what can we do locally to help organize and strategize?
Good. Okay, so listen, in general, voter turnout is an issue where one of the more common reasons people don't vote, and if I'm on speaker, Trevor, please take us off because I'm hearing some weird feedback. It might be my own voice. One of the main reasons people don't vote is they don't believe that their vote will make a difference. From a purely mathematical standpoint, the smaller the election, the more difference any one vote is going to make. Okay, so I think that coming equipped with that information and even examples of when in local elections just a few dozen votes, one way or the other, made significant political difference. I think that that's one thing, number one. Number two, I think it's important to relate how voting connects to issues that are important to that person. So there are sometimes people who aren't not voting because they don't think their vote makes a difference, but it's because they don't think that their vote connects with anything that will impact their day-to-day lives, right? And particularly with local voting, you're talking about issues that will impact people's day-to-day lives much more in some cases than the decisions that will be made for the president, right? So I think that those are two of the best ways to get out the vote at the local level.
Oh, yeah, definitely agreed. Thanks for taking my call. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, Trevor. Appreciate it. Short and sweet today, Pat. These people, we're going right one after the other. Let's go to, I don't know, the 830 area code. I don't think we've ever taken a call from 830. Who's that? Who's there at 830? What's on your mind today?
Hi, David. I was just wondering, what books would you recommend for a fellow political junkie to like get started? Like your top 5 books that you would recommend.
Oh man, that is so tough. I mean, what can you be more specific? What are you looking to learn, I guess? But politics is just such a general thing, you know?
Like maybe political philosophy, economics, just something like that, maybe?
Oh man, I mean, with economics, I would recommend starting with a lot of the key books from sort of rational, traditional economics to understand that foundation, and then move on to behavioral economics and other economic theories. So you could start with everything from, you know, The Wealth of Nations to something like, not that I want to pitch his books, but Thomas Sowell's book, Basic Economics, which gives us like a standard sort of conservative, rational economic approach. Then pull out something like Richard Wolff, my former professor and economist Richard Wolff's book, Neoclassical versus Marxist Economics, to start understanding the difference. Maybe you would read some Marx. I would check out Angus Deaton's recent book, the name of which escapes me, but it's about inequality. Fantastic book. I would read Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow and some of Dan Ariely's books to understand how real world economics is not this hypothetical, rational economics. So I don't know, there's 6 or 7 books for you to start with, I guess.
Well, thanks, David. I really appreciate all the lists.
All right. Thank you so much. I'll let you get back to, sounds like there's a lot going on in the background there. So I'll let you get back to that. Seems like a very, very busy day over there. Okay. Let's go to our next caller from the 630 area code. Caller from 630. What's your name? Where are you calling from? What's your question?
I'm calling from Chicago, and my name is Gerardo. And my question was, I noticed I was watching the interview you did with Dave Rubin a while back, and I was wondering when you were actually going to do the interview on his show.
Oh, when I'm going to be on his program?
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, basically, last we talked about it, it's an open invite for whenever I'm next in Los Angeles. I think he wants to do it in studio and not via Skype. So I don't know. Right now, I might not get to Los Angeles until April of next year. So it might not be before that. If at that time he's still willing to have me, I don't know if the offer is good, if it has an expiration date on it, you know?
Yeah, I was actually wondering if you guys had a falling out over your interview. That's why I was curious and why I brought up the question.
I'm sorry, if I can barely hear this caller.
He's wondering if you've had a falling out with Dave Rubin since the interview.
Sorry
not that I'm aware. I mean, you know, sorry, what was that?
I was just wondering if you guys had a falling out because of the interview you guys did.
Got it. I honestly don't know the answer to that. If I knew the answer for sure, I would tell you. I've not talked to Dave much since the interview, and I know that I pressed him on some issues, and there was reaction to that online. And he's not indicated to me that he's upset with me for the interview where I asked questions about health insurance and taxation and all sorts of other policy. I couldn't say one way or the other, honestly.
Well, it was an excellent interview, and you got a great show going on, man. So
thank you. All right, appreciate it. Okay, let's try the 516 area code. Caller from 516, you're on. Tell me who you are, where you're calling from, and what's on your mind.
Hey, David. How you doing? I'm John from Springfield, New Jersey.
What's on your mind, John?
But my question's a little involved, so just give me a second to make my case. Just curious on what your thoughts are on, I'm presuming that you've been following up with the latest news with the Harvey Weinstein scandal and just Hollywood and the Twitter boycott and so forth. Want your thoughts on the current climate and reactions to the Harvey Weinstein scandal and the very real and scary paradigm of men in power using their position of influence to harass and molest and rape women without fear of consequence, but particularly with this climate of the finger pointing and putting so much stock in accusations rather than genuine convictions. You know, sort of alluding to, I'm not sure if you're familiar with like the Woody Allen quote that's been sort of misinterpreted but still distasteful regarding witch hunt in Hollywood. Again, I'm not trying to allude that I have any sort of sympathy for Harvey Weinstein or anything, but just basically this general attitude of putting so much stock in accusations. It just reminds me very much of the Red Scare in Hollywood in the late 1940s.
Yeah, so a couple thoughts. I mean, number one, I would hesitate to go to Woody Allen one way or the other on anything related to sexual impropriety. The guy is with his adopted stepdaughter, right? He's now married. I don't know if they're married or he's romantically involved with his adopted stepdaughter. So I wouldn't necessarily go to Woody Allen first and foremost on what's going on with Harvey Weinstein.
I'm alluding to the fact that just because he had, you know, I'm not trying to defend his personal history, or I'm not trying to put him as some sort of authority figure, but right. He pointed out, you know, a very real witch hunt-like mob mentality that I would like your thoughts on.
Well, listen, I mean, my thoughts on Weinstein are similar to with Bill Cosby, right? I mean, this is a guy who appears to be, by every indication, a total scumbag, and these allegations, they much like with Bill Cosby, they're coming from women who don't know each other, much like with our current president, Donald Trump, women who, to argue that they are somehow conspiring to concoct stories that date over decades and decades, et cetera. I mean, there's no defense you're going to hear from me of the alleged actions, because my default is not to not believe the alleged victims. And if the question is, are there ever false accusations of sexual assault? Of course there are. Of course there are sometimes false accusations of sexual assault. But I don't know specifically what it is you want me to comment on.
Just particularly this, it's really sort of an Oppression Olympics extension, I think, with regards to, the Me Too hashtag trending on Twitter, like that. It's just kind of this strange sort of deification of victimhood, and just putting, there's like the Casey Affleck thing. I'm not too familiar with his whole thing, but just the fact that he's being considered a sexual, and the fact that settlements are being used as confessions of guilt and so forth. And just
but listen, settlements are not confessions of guilt. Settlements are not confessions of guilt. But if you see a pattern,
no. But how in general, of course not. But in general, how it's so often seen and suggested that it is. It's just kind of. Are you at all concerned with just general? And I think it's fair to say leftist culture in general, of just not rushing to the defense of the accused, but which is what happens in a liberal democracy, innocent before proven guilty.
Yeah, listen, I'm concerned with it. I'm concerned with it insofar as I've identified, you're mixing a bunch of different issues, right? You're talking about deification of victimhood.
Not really.
You're talking about oppression. Hold on a second. You're talking about Oppression Olympics. You're mixing a whole bunch of different stuff. So we've got to really break these down.
No, it's inseparably entwined.
Okay.
I don't think that's
unfortunately. Listen, if you see it as all the same thing, you see it as all the same thing. I'm trying to give you at least an answer.
They're all entwined.
I'm trying to give you an answer to at least part of your question, and you're not letting me. So maybe we'll talk about it at some other time. But these are separate issues. I've been critical of some of the issues you've mentioned. You're also wrapping things together that aren't actually related operationally. I don't think I'm going to have an answer that you'll be okay with today. So maybe we'll address it in the future.
I was just curious what your thoughts were on it.
Well, you didn't let me then give them to you. You kept telling me I don't understand the issue, so maybe
you weren't addressing my question specifically. You were defending your own track, saying I stand with the women. I don't. I'm not asking your position on the individual cases against Harvey Weinstein. I'm talking about the culture. Yeah,
well, I'm telling you, I'm against the idea of Oppression Olympics. I think Oppression Olympics is different than the default of not assuming accusers of sexual assault, something that's highly stigmatized, are lying. Like, do you see how those are two different things?
Yeah, but I'm not implying that women are lying. I'm just talking about the general culture.
So I don't think I know that. You want me to issue some blanket critique of the general culture. And what I'm telling you is what you're calling the general culture are different issues. And if you don't agree to that, then there's really nothing to talk about.
Okay, I was just wondering if you had made these similar sort of observations that you think I'm too generalizing or to make drawing. I don't know. It seems that you think I have an unfair sort of observation of the.
I'm not saying you're being unfair. I'm just saying you've decided how these issues are related, and unless I answer with that as an assumed part of it, you're not going to agree with me. So I think let's put a pause on it there. Okay. That's it for calls this week. Some good ones, some very short ones, some longer ones. We didn't agree with the premises with every call, but what I can tell you is that we will take calls again.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
All right, this week's classic interview, very relevant to what's been going on in the media and in society over the last 6 months. My interview with Joshua Turner from back in June of 2015. Joshua Turner was a former Christian, or is a former Christian neo-Nazi, and he is an incredible story of how critical thinking and reasonable analysis of our world took him out of very extremist circles. I don't think it needs much more introduction than that. My interview with Joshua Turner from June of 2015. I'm joined today by Joshua Turner, who's president and founder of America's first secular prison outreach organization called Saved by Reason. And when I heard about Joshua's story, I wanted to get him on the show to talk about it because it is really an incredible story, and it involves everything from drug addiction, crime at a young age, a prison sentence, and ultimately neo-Nazi, anti-science ideology, and so much more. What's the best place to start, Joshua? I think it would be tell us a little bit sort of about the context of your childhood.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's where it all starts, as it does for everybody. We pick up a lot of the personalities and traits as we're, growing up as children, and we pick a lot of that up from our parents. And my parents happened to be evangelical Christian. They were extremely fundamentalist. My mother had a very hard upbringing, and she experienced some really, really rough things that I couldn't even imagine going through myself. So when she was 17 years old, she became a Christian, and she was just like full bore. So she ended up becoming a Pentecostal and joined Calvary Chapel, which was a fundamentalist Christian group that I grew up in. And when I say irrational, I do really mean irrational. If anybody's read my blog, I tell a story about my mom and dad sitting my brother and I down when I was 8 years old and my brother was 6. They sat us down and told us that we were going to be facing what is called the mark of the beast, and basically nobody could buy, sell, or trade any kind of food without taking the mark of the beast. And credit cards are just a sign that that's much closer to that type of technology of having a mark or a chip in your arm where you can just scan it. And so my parents literally believed, because it says in Revelation that to buy, sell, or trade food during the end times, that you would need to take this mark. And they believed, because their pastor told them that this was happening very, very soon, like within the next few years. They told me and my brother that we would be held down and tortured in front of my parents so that they would take the mark, but under any circumstances we couldn't take it.
And did you believe this stuff literally as they were telling it to you?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're gonna believe what your parents tell you at 8 years old, especially when they're calling a very serious family meeting and they're full of tears and they're crying, and you guys are praying all night that that God will just allow a quick death and just a beheading instead of all the torture. And yeah, I absolutely believed it.
And how did that? So that was from a very young age, and now you talk about the religious fundamentalism of that. Was there also any of the neo-Nazi ideology that you eventually fell into that came from your parents, or was that totally separate?
I would say that the hate was separate. My parents never justified or supported racism. They believed that we're all God's people, but they were extremely right-wing. My father listened to Rush Limbaugh. They're anti-liberal. They have lots of intolerance towards the gay community, towards minority communities because of crime. So they didn't hate based on race, but they did have intolerance and right-wing ideology. So that definitely kind of pushed me in the direction towards neo-Nazism, or it at least made that step a lot easier for me because I had already grown up around right-wing voices.
And when you were 14, what happened that pushed you towards the drugs and the crime?
Really, that was just my way, I think, of lashing out and rebelling. Really, yeah. When you're doing things at that age, you don't really know why you're doing them at the time, and so when you grow up, you reflect and you try to realize what was going on in your head at the time. But yeah, I think I was just lashing out and rebelling because things were so strict at home. I was an artist. I loved to draw as a kid, and that was suppressed at home. My parents didn't want me. They didn't like what I drew. I draw Ninja Turtles and stuff, and they wanted me to draw Jesus and Moses. And so I was just really sheltered, and I wasn't allowed to grow into the person that I wanted to be. So I think that drugs and just hanging out with the wrong crowd was my way of just lashing out and trying to find out who I was.
And as this continued, you were eventually convicted of carjacking, and you end up in the California prison system. And what's that like?
Well, in prison, if you're white, basically your only choices are to run with the Woods or the skinheads. The Woods, there's a huge range of what the Woods are categorized as, but basically they range anywhere from non-affiliated gang members that just stick to their county. They hang out with whatever county they're from, and then it can go all the way up to Aryan Brothers, several white supremacist gangs that aren't necessarily neo-Nazi in their ideology, but just racist, or like the Klan and stuff. They're considered Woods. And then there's the skinheads, and they're a lot more structured. They're united by neo-Nazi ideology. They didn't use drugs, at least they weren't supposed to. I hung out. I didn't hang out with actual skinheads in my town because there really wasn't any active skinheads in my town. But I guess you could say me and my friends were posers. We'd watch, American History X, and we wore our Doc Marten boots and got online and learned what the 14 words were. But we weren't actual skinheads. We were just kind of posers. So when I got into the environment where there was real skinheads that were indoctrinated with neo-Nazi ideology, I had an opportunity to learn from them. So that's what I did. I just felt more comfortable with those guys. A lot of them were Christians. There's a movement called Christian identity and neo-Nazism. So I went with that, man. It just felt right to me.
And so what was appealing about it? I mean, so you mentioned some familiarity with a little bit of the ideology, the sort of interplay with the Christian upbringing that you had. Was that it, or was there something else that made that the most appealing path in prison?
Yeah, I mean, it was comforting because it just felt so familiar. I was used to going to church with all kinds of pageantry and symbology and songs, and that's what the skinheads had, you know what I mean? We'd have our Nazi flags up, and, it was just really similar, hanging on the word of the pastor. Now instead of doing that out on the street as a Christian, now I was hanging on every word of our skinhead leader. And the psychology behind it is very similar. As a Christian, we're told, that we're not supposed to hate anybody. We're supposed to love and all that. But at the same time, Christians are still intolerant. It's the same thing with skinheads. They'll try to tell you, we're not about hate, we're about loving our race. But at the same time, they're intolerant of other people. So, yeah, I mean, it was just very similar in all kinds of ways.
And while you were in prison, as part of this skinhead gang that you were running with, did you have to go through any sort of initiation? Did you have to commit violent acts in order to sort of prove yourself? Tell us about that.
No, when I got there, I had my head shaved and I knew the 14 words. I knew a little bit about, what a skinhead was. So I just kind of fell right in, and nobody really questioned whether I had been initiated or not on the street. But no, I never really was initiated. I just started calling myself a skinhead, and had they checked, they would have found out that, I was not really involved with any neo-Nazi movement or anything. I was just an independent skinhead.
So you eventually get out of prison, and at this point, what happens with regards to the drugs and the criminality? Does that continue? And then what happens as far as this skinhead identity that you've taken on?
Yeah, so I got out, and what my goal to do was to be the best neo-Nazi that you could be. So, Christianity, we have a Bible, or they have a Bible to follow, and the skinheads have the 14 words and the 88 precepts. So I studied the 88 precepts well. Not doing drugs was in the precepts. So I attempted to be a good neo-Nazi, but as I had told you before, I started using drugs at 14 years old, and even in prison, I was using behind their back without their knowledge. So quitting drugs was extremely hard for me. And so I really started looking for ways to get get help for my drug addiction. I started to kind of move away from the whole Christianity thing. I've always had doubts about Christianity and kind of leaned towards atheism, even when I was, in prison and doing the Christian identity thing. I always had doubts, so I ended up picking up The God Delusion by Richard Dawkins, and that's basically the turning point for me. That's when I learned that I wasn't applying critical thinking to my life, and yeah.
So I want to remind everybody that we've been speaking with Joshua Turner, who is president and founder of the secular prison outreach organization Saved by Reason. We'll take a break and then we'll have our full interview with Joshua up on our YouTube channel. So Joshua, as you started to, I'm actually curious, how did you end up, did you go and look for that Richard Dawkins book? Did someone suggest it to you? What were the circumstances of just picking that up?
Well, my search for truth really has been a long journey. I've read a lot of philosophy. I've read a lot of theology. I've always been trying to find out the big answers that everybody asks. Where we come from, why are we here? And I was reading a lot of philosophy at the time, and just the one area of philosophy that I had never really got into was secularism and materialism. And I think it was a friend of mine who recommended the God Delusion. So yeah, I just picked up the God Delusion, and bam, it was just a domino effect from there, man. Then I got Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens and Peter Boghossian, and just started going from there. And I really got swept up by the new atheist movement. And the only difference here is that I'm not a follower. I'm not a follower hanging on the words of Richard Dawkins. I see him as just a regular person. He's just written a lot of things that have helped me, and I've applied those things to my life. But he's not like a savior to me, or somebody that I put on a pedestal or anything like that.
And as you started getting into these readings and moving in a different direction with regard to your religion, what was going on with the relationship with your parents, who, as you mentioned, hardline Christians, Pentecostal, etc.?
Mm-hmm. Well, didn't go well. I wasn't quiet about what I was learning. I truly believe that secular values and just having an open mind and being skeptical is just a great way to live your life, honestly. And I just wanted to share that with my parents. So I started to talk to them about what I was reading, and it just honestly just didn't turn out well. They're very closed-minded and not open to hearing anybody else's side or anything like that, even though it's coming from their son, who they can see firsthand is changing their life and totally turning their life around for the first time.
Were they able to, I'm curious whether they were able to sort of, because as you started reading this type of material, not only were you changing how you were thinking about the world, but you were also changing your actions, right, with regard to being a neo-Nazi and being involved with crime, etc. Were they able to recognize that even if it wasn't that they believed literally what it was that you were reading about, that it was at least correlating with a positive change in your life?
I don't even think they're willing to admit that. I think that they are equating my success with their prayers. I tell them all the time that my wife and I experience blessings every day, and neither one of us utters a single prayer to any deity. So, and their response is always, well, we pray for you. So yeah, no, didn't.
Let's talk a little bit about the prison outreach part of this, because we've talked to so many different people, both academics and people who have been in prison, and there is this very strong tendency to find religion in prison, and then we see that sort of perpetuated throughout the lives of individuals once they come out of prison. Why does that seem to happen? Is it the circumstances of being in prison and religion sort of seems to be like the natural thing for people to go to? Is there something else that seems to drive people when they're in that circumstance to look to religion?
Really, it's just a comfort blanket. when you're in prison, you are utterly alone. You're sitting in a cell by yourself for 23 hours a lot of the time, and so it's really lonely. And yeah, it's really a comfort blanket. A lot of people that go to prison haven't had a lot of higher education, myself included. So we don't have much to go on when we're sitting in there by ourselves, and it's just very just I can't even think of the word, but yeah, it's just
It sort of
scary.
comes naturally in a sense that this is the way people go. It just feels like the
Right.
obvious thing.
Exactly, yeah.
So what are you trying to do with Save by Reason? Is the idea, obviously, the reintegration of former inmates to society is a huge issue that we have.
Yes.
So what are you doing along those lines? And is the idea to sort of introduce critical thinking skills into that?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, what Say by Reason is we're basically a prison outreach organization for non-believers currently in prison. If you are a Christian or a Muslim or a Buddhist, there's all kinds of information or outreach programs, ministers that will come visit you. But if you identify as non-religious or atheist or whatever kind of epithet you want to use, there's absolutely nothing, no program that I'm aware of. There is Center for Inquiry. They do pen pals and they do send secular books into prisoners, but that's it. And so yeah, so that's where Save by Reason comes in. We're filling that void of reaching out to prisoners that don't identify as religious. And what we do to teach, what we do to use as sort of a, because Christians have a book to go off of, the Bible, and Muslims have the Quran. And everybody has their little book to go off of. And as secularists, it's my job to kind of come up with very simple concepts that will help the inmates lower their recidivism by increasing moral reasoning and critical thinking skills. And one of the techniques that we use to do that is by teaching the Socratic method.
And talk to us about that. So in what way does teaching the Socratic method, in your mind, help to prepare prisoners for when they're out in the real world to avoid falling into the same patterns?
Right. Well, what the Socratic method does is it teaches you to pause and to reflect on an ideology or a belief or just a definition of something, or just something somebody tells you. What the Socratic method does is it gives you a tool set to analyze that, whatever you've been told, to see if that is indeed correct or if you agree with it. And we find everybody, me, you, even we do this. People just hand down facts to us. People in authority, usually politicians or a boss or a parent, will just tell us something, and we'll just not question it and assume it's correct. And so that's what the Socratic method does. If you apply it, is it helps you to reflect and to self-analyze and self-inquiry into the truth, to see if you agree with yourself, and essentially you're just living your life day to day for yourself, and you're believing and acting in a way that you agree with, and you're not doing things just because somebody told you.
And if people want to learn more about Save by Reason, where's the best place for them to do that?
They can go on our website, savebyreason.org. It's
Fantastic.
a great place. Or they can follow us on Twitter, Save by Reason.
All right, I'll tell everybody once again, we've been speaking with Joshua Turner. He is president and founder of the secular prison outreach organization, Save by Reason. Thanks so much for telling us your story.
Right on. Thanks, David. It's great to be here, man. Appreciate it.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Okay, let's do some audience questions. Raquel wrote in, David, isn't it a bad thing when really famous actors are in movie roles, because it's hard to really see them as the characters because they're already so well known as people? I prefer movies where the actors are not well known because the characters are more credible. Raquel, I agree with you. I experienced this with the sci-fi movie that came out a few years ago now, Ex Machina. And at least to me, the actors in that movie were not well known, and it made it a much more immersive and credible experience. And honestly, at the beginning of House of Cards, I was having a little bit of a problem because Kevin Spacey is so well known that it's hard to see him as Frank Underwood and not as just Kevin Spacey with an accent. But over time, I did persevere and get over and really enjoy House of Cards. But I completely agree, Pat, with Raquel here. I do enjoy movies where I don't know any of the actors because it makes it a much more realistic experience for me.
Well, I just think it depends on the actor. So if you're talking about, Brad Pitt, Kate Winslet, Meryl Streep, they're people who get the Oscars because they're able to adapt to so many roles. But then there are those actors who are just the same person in every movie. So like, Adam Sandler, Michael Cera, Will Ferrell. You can't imagine them playing Superman, for example. I think it depends.
Well, I want to say I am not a huge fan of Adam Sandler, but in Punch Drunk Love, he did depart from the standard Adam Sandler character. But by and large, yeah, I do agree with you. And I used to think the same
Spanglish
thing.
as well.
Spanglish as well. That's right. Yeah. So there actually are, and politically, I think that I am completely disgusted by Adam Sandler, but he has actually had a couple of those roles that are interesting. Yeah, I guess you're right. I mean, the best actors are the best because they are adapting to these roles. But on average, I'm on board, Raquel, completely. I do tend to enjoy movies more, and I really don't see that many movies. So in particular, I like it when I just show up, I don't know anything about any of the actors, and it's just the story. So yes, I'm on board 100%. Cynthia wrote in, are there seemingly basic life skills that many people lack? Okay, I don't, anytime we get these questions, I worry that I'm going to offend people. And then someone writes in and says, David, don't worry about offending people. Just give us your opinion. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. The ability to communicate effectively in written form. Okay, this is a basic life skill that way too many people lack. I communicate with people who have not insignificant jobs and roles that they are involved in that require writing, and they are writing like they are in 4th or 5th grade, right? And I find it very, very off-putting because it generally makes me question if their writing is like this, what's their thinking like? Have you experienced that, Pat, without naming anybody, but even like in guest booking for the show, that some people can't communicate well in written form?
Right, or so sometimes I'll offer 2 dates for an interview to them, and they'll respond by saying yes. So then you have to follow up, like, which one? Then that's not really an answer to this question.
Yeah, I think that's a skill that is lacking. Number 2, basic financial skills, just very simple financial skills. The time value of money, right? The concept of how the time value of money has to be adjusted, whether you're thinking about money available in the future or now, interest rates, et cetera. The basics of debt, right? I mean, just basic personal finance and understanding credit and debt and how to make a budget. I know so many people who I know are not doing well financially, and they seem to have incredibly lax control over just charging $50 in a few drinks at an expensive bar or whatever. And it just those basic financial skills are significantly lacking. And I don't know, Pat, since you're younger, do you see, I think the financial skills hopefully will come with age, although it doesn't always happen that way in the United States. Do you see friends of yours who just seem to spend uncontrollably?
Oh, maybe so, because, you get out of college where you may have been making some minimum wage salary, and then you get, something that you're qualified for, and you're going to be obviously making a lot of money, but then you don't realize that you now have expenditures too, like rent and student loans and all of that. So I definitely have seen that as well.
Basic critical thinking skills. Too many people lack the ability to critically analyze messages that they're given. And I know that this relates specifically to what I'm teaching at Boston College and have been lecturing on. But basic critical thinking skills. Can you identify when you are being given a conclusion that doesn't follow from the premises and you are being led astray? And that relates to media literacy as well. I don't, my instinct is that the problem is partially that those skills aren't being taught early in school. Certainly not in elementary school. I don't really think in middle school or high school, at least in many parts of the country. But I meet so many people, and maybe because we work in media, Pat, we notice it even more. But I'll bump into someone who casually will say, hey, did you see what's going on with X or Y? I saw a news story about it. And it's immediately obvious that they have no clue what the story is about. They might have heard a headline and didn't go any further than that, or they heard one news story and are completely unable to critically analyze it. And this leads to people like Trump getting elected, sadly.
Yeah, and it's not even worth it to bring it up in the first place if you haven't looked at the source and read the article. I completely agree with you there. I'm thinking about just basic cleaning skills. Like, I've lived with people in an apartment, and sometimes they would have a tray of food and go a few hours without attempting to clean it, and then obviously the food will stick to the plate a little bit, and they just try to throw it into the dishwasher thinking that it will magically wash the dish. You got to do a little bit more than that.
You've got to soak those plates, right? I mean, what you think that things are just going to be clean if you toss them in the dishwasher? No doubt. And I think with that one, just general lack of knowledge about, you do want to change your sheets with some regularity, and usually you want to wash those in warm water. And it's a pretty good idea to, sweep and mop the floors in the bathrooms every once in a while. I know a lot of people who still, even in their 30s, don't really ever clean their apartments, which is, It strikes me as odd, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think they just start to get used to it. But if you're having guests over frequently, that reason alone should be enough for you to clean your habitat.
What I would give for a camera in Pat's place when he's hosting a cocktail party. That would be an experience.
Maybe the video is available online. Who knows?
Maybe it already is out there. Doogie wrote in. I don't know if that's the real name. Doogie says, "What childish behaviors are too common in adults?" Sadly, because we work in politics and media, I run into lots of these all the time. Treating others poorly. I can't stand when adults treat others poorly. This applies to just service workers is a common one. And I've talked about this before. If I go to a restaurant or a bar and someone I'm with is rude to the waitstaff, my opinion of that person immediately falls off a cliff, because there's no reason whatsoever to be treating people poorly, particularly people who are providing a service to you. I don't know if you're bothered by that, Pat, or maybe you don't know people who do this, but I've been out with people who start treating the waitstaff really rudely, and it is a major, major red flag to me.
Right, and what do they end up doing afterwards? They ask to speak to a manager, right? And that ties into this childish idea, because I think that's equivalent to going and telling someone's mom what they did wrong.
Lying for no reason. I know people who lie for absolutely no reason as adults, and I could speculate maybe they think that they're making themselves more interesting by telling lies. Maybe they believe that they are trying to create a better image of who they are. But adults who lie for no reason and lie obviously, very, very weird. I don't get that. And I know people, Pat, who are total liars about anything, and I just don't even bother to follow up with them. Like, I know they're lying and I let them lie and I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a consequentialist in the sense that I think sometimes it's justifiable to lie. It can get you out of a sticky situation, for example. But it's just very strange when people lie needlessly, either to make themselves sound cooler or nicer or what have you. But sometimes even the objectives, you can't really understand why they would make up the lie. I think they're just doing it for their own fun. It's very, very strange.
Well, that's what makes me wonder if it's actually some kind of diagnosable condition, right? We hear about this idea of the pathological liar who seems unable to control their lying. I don't know whether that's a diagnosable condition or not, but the level of lying that I see some adults engage in makes me wonder, could this be anything other than someone who has some kind of condition that they can't control? Almost like sometimes when people have Tourette's syndrome, they can't control utterances of swears or other sort of verbal things. Maybe there's some equivalent with lying, because it's hard to understand it any other way.
Yeah, there's always these fantastical stories that happen in these people's lives, even though they just go home every day and watch TV. This didn't happen.
Pat doesn't know people who have those fantastical lives. He knows you're just going home and watching Netflix after all.
I'm watching you.
Okay, last one, just real quickly. Cutting in line, okay? Cutting in line at the deli, cutting in line at the grocery store, cutting in line boarding a plane. We're adults here. Don't cut in line. We all see what you're doing, and it's absolutely and utterly pathetic. Okay, great bonus show today. A study is supporting a Massachusetts time zone change. Am I for or against it? I'll tell you on the bonus show, plus much more. DavidPakman.com/membership, Patreon.com/DavidPakmanShow. Both give you instant access to the bonus show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.